Okay, welcome. Thank you all for braving rain and snow or whatever else to come to this meeting today. It's been a year since we launched the SLC. And Lizzie, can you go to the next slide? Our goals today are to reflect and report on what we've done during the first year, to build excitement and talk about our priorities for the next year, ensure transparency of SLC activities. Not that any of us are trying to hide anything, but there's so much going on, it's hard to know what other groups within the SLC are doing. And establish new and strengthen existing relationships between SLC members. And I would like to mention especially that we want to welcome and orient our new student members. Next. So here's an overview of the agenda. Provost Sunil Kumar has joined us, and he's going to be talking for a few minutes. Then we're going to have update from the co-chairs and Julian. Then each of the 4 subcommittees will talk for a few minutes about what they've done and what they plan to do this year. And then we're going to have breakout rooms. We don't want this whole experience to be us talking at you. We want to hear from you, and we'll be telling you more about our plan for the breakout rooms in a little while. And then we'll come back together after the breakout rooms, and different rooms will have the option of sharing what they came up with, and then a couple of closing remarks. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Provost Sunil Kumar, who probably had to fight a lot to get this into his schedule, because during this age of pandemics, meetings are always on top of meetings. He's been with us since the beginning of this process and has been very supportive. And take it away, Provost Sunil.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all for joining. I won't take too much of your time. I wanted to say 3 things. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for adding another Zoom meeting to your calendar, but I know that for all of you, this is an important aspect of both your professional lives as well as your personal interests. And so I'm glad that we're able to provide a forum for this. The university is doing the best it can virtually, given that while our labs are open and some of our human subject research is going on, most of our activities are virtual. And I just looked at a survey of undergraduates that we got back, and while they're mostly fine with their classes and in fact feel that they have more access to their professors online than they did in person, which is a good sign, they really miss the university community. So the one thing where we got the people expressed the most concern was that the community was not as strong as they had either hoped for freshmen or had been used to for upper class students. And so I think this is it's an important reminder for us on how much we have to work at putting our community together, especially given that there is no reason, unfortunately, the experts tell me, to suspect that by October 15th, this is all over and we're all back in. In fact, I'd be happy if by October 15, 21, we're back in action. So this is, so given that, I'm delighted that we're able to do this. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is about the SLC's activities so far, my impressions of those, and in particular, 4 areas of priority they have identified for next year, and talk about them a little bit. I know that the co-chairs will say more about that to you. So we set up the SLC somewhat in analogy to the Diversity Leadership Council, which has been around now for about 15 years. And every year, the Diversity Leadership Council picks 3 or 4 things that it thinks are priorities for the year that it would like to produce measurable movement on. And an example of that is, 2 years ago, the Diversity Leadership Council took on the staff composition reports. While we measured our students and our faculty ad nauseum, we did not, see, for example, how good career progression takes place among our staff members. And the DLC took that on as a priority. And now we have a staff composition report at the university that reports every 2 years on how people are progressing in their careers among the staff. So we encourage the co-chairs of the SLC to think about this the same way, and they've come back with 4 priority areas, 2 of which are what I would consider operational. One is a refurbishment of and an update of the university's own sustainability plan, which I think is extremely important, and in fact, that the SLC is a lead player in this is extremely valuable. So that's I think, something we'd like to have in place by the end of the academic year, this academic year. And so I'm delighted that the SLC has taken that on as one of the priorities. The other is building out its own infrastructure, websites, stuff like that, which I think is also important operational priority. But the 2 others that they brought up were also, for me, one of them I'd like to spend a few minutes on today, was extremely interesting, important, and I think worth executing on. And the first one is environmental justice with a focus on Baltimore, which I thought was particularly valuable. And the reasons are, I mean, I don't need to make the case for why environmental justice in Baltimore is important to study and act on. That I consider that as a settled matter, that in fact we should do this. But on the other hand, it also has it brings up important questions on 2 dimensions. One is what to do, and second, what parts of the university to use to do with this. And one of the ideas they came up with is what they're calling an equity dashboard. And an equity dashboard, for me, feels like an important way in which the university can contribute, which is as a purveyor of truth, which, 20 years ago, you would say, well, why do we need one more purveyor of truth? Today, I don't think people will be shocked when you say you want a reliable purveyor of truth. And I think the environmental justice dashboard is an example of a priority that we would very much like to get behind, the president and myself. And it also illustrates another point. There's a very similar dashboard that the Berman Institute of Bioethics has set up in conjunction with the School of Education for racial injustice in schools and school reopening, and inequity in school reopening. And you can look at that dashboard as a kind of model for how to build this out. And so here's an example of a project that can connect across parts of the university, add significant value to the local community, bring together people from community and the university, and more importantly, serve as a platform for action. The reason you build the dashboard is to then try and see if you can make the numbers come out better the next time around. And so I think that I just use that as an example to illustrate that the year has been spent in coming up with these fruitful and important priorities, and the next year should be spent on executing, right? So it's time to move on these things, and we'll try and provide. We're not exactly swimming in resources at this time, in case you've not realized. We've actually taken a little bit of a bath, but despite that, I think I had mentioned at the SLC conference that this remains a priority, and in difficult times, the way you show something is a priority is you still find resources for it. And I wanted to commit to finding resources for these projects. The final project I want to talk to is also about aspiration. So this is a project about setting up a faculty cluster, maybe even a department in energy. And I know that, that's an example of something that won't happen overnight, requires lots of people to buy in, and yet is an example of something that is at the right aspirational level. And so while it may not get done by July of next year, that you have 10 more faculty in energy, it is very much an example of you should have one or two projects at that level of aspiration that are not intended just for aspirational purposes, that we intend to act on, but on a longer time scale and with greater buy-in and careful cultivation of resources. For example, creation of perhaps a Bloomberg Distinguished Professor cluster, and so on. And so that's another example of a priority that many of you worked on, produced a white paper on this. I shopped the white paper around with deans. We'll get feedback from them, and I intend to at least progress with effort on that. And so both in terms of priorities that you want to execute in the coming year, as well as priorities that will be multi-year kind of sustained projects, I think the SLC is headed in the right direction. So, and you have our support for the things that you've come up with. So with that, I'll stop and pass it back to Peter with my thanks to you all, and expecting to see both progress on the identified priorities, but also continued identification of other things that the university or the SLC should do. So with that, let me turn it back to you, Peter.
Thank you. That sets the stage perfectly for this meeting, and we really appreciate the time you put into preparing this and laying out the issues. I couldn't have said it better myself. Lizzie, can we return to the slides now? Okay, for those of you who just joined a couple of minutes ago, we just heard from Provost Sunil Kumar. Can you go back one, Lizzie? And then I want to say that our co-chair for the SLC, Bob McLean, had another meeting come up at the last minute that he absolutely couldn't get out of. So he sends his regrets. He can't be with us today. Also, whenever you aren't talking, please stay on mute. And also, as questions come up, we can't have a Q&A after each presenter, but in the breakout rooms, that will be your opportunity to discuss things that have occurred to you. And also, we always welcome you sending us your thoughts and questions. So moving along, most of you with us on this call today were with us a year ago when we launched the SLC, but we had a number of our student members graduate, and we've brought on many new student members, and here they are. And can you unshare for a minute? And I like to have all the student members just wave at us for a second. That means that you're going to have to, yes, thank you, student members. Okay, so can you share the PowerPoint again? And I'd like to point out that these new student members come from all parts of the university and are distributed across all the subcommittees, and we really look forward to their inputs. Next. So now I'm going to briefly reflect on what we've accomplished in the last year. We launched the SLC about 1 year ago. We were scrambling to put it together. We didn't know whether we'd be ready to start in September. We did. We had a launch meeting, and then the subcommittees and working groups started meeting. Along the way, we established the terms for membership. We established a nomination process, and we recruited students, faculty, and staff for our first year. We formalized the charter and council structure and created a web page, and you're going to hear more about how we're trying to build that out further. And we've established 4 subcommittees. At the beginning, we didn't have working groups, but as time has gone on, we've been establishing more and more as different topics come up that we want to work on. And finally, we had an inaugural symposium in April with around 230 attendees, with guest speaker and different activities. And that was really a great event. And many of you on the call today made big contributions to that. Next. Looking forward, and Provost Sunil Kumar mentioned many of these, we're working to increase student participation, and I just announced a minute ago who all the new student members are. We've added an environmental justice theme to the SLC activities, and we're going to start with a focus on Baltimore City, and I expect that's where the focus is going to stay for quite some time, because there are long-standing issues of injustice in environment and environmental health in Baltimore City that we haven't been monitoring and working on in a consistent way, the way we should, and we're trying to redress that. We're publishing our first annual report very soon, and we're also starting work on a new sustainability plan, and Julian Goresko will talk about that in a minute. We're trying to update our web presence so that it serves the entire sustainability and environment community across the entire university. More on that a bit later, and developing a proposal for an energy department, or maybe an energy institute, or an energy something else, and more on that a bit later. Next. Okay, over to Julian.
Thanks, Peter. I'm saying hello today from a cold and rainy porch. I think probably many of you can relate, as work from home life, you know, brings us into each other's houses in different ways. I was telling Peter and Lizzie and others this morning that there's no good light in the house, and there's children and relatives everywhere. So this is the only place for me. I'm going to make the best of it. I'm also, you know, I'm really happy, you know, the silver lining for me, that is, of, you know, the current situation we're in with telework and telepresence, you know, is that I do think we're getting, I remember at the beginning, I would say, of, you know, our stay-at-home time, that there's a lot of concern about connectivity between people. And although there's enormous hardship right now, I think I've really been heartened by people carving out time and showing up to really double down on important commitments such as this. And in a lot of ways, I feel like it's brought many of us closer together. And I'm just really grateful for our community here and all the work and expertise that you all are contributing. So, you know, as we were setting up our thoughts for today and reflecting on this past year and thinking about the future, I'm very happy to share, you know, to see Peter and Sunil and others share some of the things we've accomplished together in our first year. And I would also encourage us all, you know, to think big in the years ahead, and to not forget the past, but not necessarily always let it dictate the future, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think many of you know that it is time to update the Johns Hopkins Climate Sustainability Plan framework for the institution. Plans are important, although they, you know, can be boring, you know, to some folks and come across as administrative documents. I believe that, you know, they are our values and mission and goals and strategies, you know, in a public-facing document that speak to our values and how we plan to accomplish tasks in the year ahead, years ahead, that is. In 2007, Johns Hopkins chartered its first President's Task Force on Climate Change, and was among, you know, a cadre of early schools to do so, culminating in a report including with many folks who were here on today's call who participated in that. And a major goal was to reduce the university's greenhouse gas emissions against our 2008 baseline, which is our emissions baseline year, by 2025. Which we're very proud to announce that, I think many of you know, due to a large solar power purchase agreement, the largest in the state of Maryland and the second largest in higher education, we plan to achieve that goal when that plant goes live in the winter of next year. So we've been working to build consensus with stakeholders like yourselves, as well as senior leadership of the university, to set us on the path to develop a new sustainability plan for Johns Hopkins. And everyone says the same thing: let's go. It's time to do this. Lizzie, can you go to the next slide? And so without being, you know, too dogmatic or prescriptive, these are some things that I think that a plan has the opportunity to deliver for us, and that is elevating the visibility of sustainability to internal and external stakeholders and aligning that plan with other institutional frameworks so it doesn't live in a vacuum. Integrated sustainability planning is critical to its success, and so we need to think about how this issue, as an enormously interdisciplinary topic, finds its way into other strategic frameworks of the institution. We need to develop robust policy, goals, and strategies for climate action in the years ahead, including mitigation and adaptation. We need to ensure that academics and research play a role in this plan that's not just operational in nature. And we need to use science-based targets to galvanize our community, to really think big and stretch what we would like to accomplish in the years ahead. So this framework will be a holistic one encompassing broad sustainability categories. We plan to kick off a university-wide engagement process this coming calendar year, depending on the timeline of things and how we are able to bring in an external consultant to aid us in the facilitation process and some of the subject matter expertise that will buttress that of the SLC and the university community. Depending on the timing, we'll either kick that off in the spring of this coming year or a little bit in early summer, to be determined. And I think that's all for me. I think next up we have some subcommittee updates.
Yeah, and we've given each subcommittee just a couple of minutes to report back. I'm sure each of them could use 20 to 30 minutes, but they don't have that. So let's start it off. Susanna.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'll try to be brief here. So the academic subcommittee, we met several of the course of the past year, composed of, I believe, so 15 faculty, undergraduates, and 1 staff, with a composition reflecting those who have the strongest stake, I think, in the academic endeavor. We have 3 on graduate education, undergraduate education, and website. So it's here. We compiled and vetted a catalog of all sustainability-related courses that are taught across the Hopkins. And the idea is to eventually so there are issues, if you take over this update.
Okay. Yeah. So sorry about that. So we've compiled and vetted a catalog of sustainability-related courses. We're working very hard on the website and have been putting together a call for proposals to bring in an external group to help us put together a website that serves the purpose of everybody in the university. We're working on sustainability-related research and education activities that will happen at 555 Penn, our new JHU building in Washington, D.C. And the second report on undergraduate education, QE2, requested comments, and we put together comments on that. And anybody who wants to see those comments would be happy to share. Next. Our priorities for the coming year, which is the year with us now, we want to build on this inventory of courses and reach out more to students and other stakeholders to make them aware of the courses. We want to identify and better address gaps in course and program offerings. We're right now about to start the process to engage an external design firm. And finally, we're starting the process of thinking, how do we build a basic level of environmental literacy across the entire student body necessary for global citizenship. And I will leave it at that.
Good morning. I believe I'm next then on the engagement subcommittee. I'm Jen Calhoun. I work in student affairs, and I am thrilled to be part of the engagement subcommittee. The role of that subcommittee is to identify programs and strategies that foster sustainable behavior change among individuals at Johns Hopkins, engage sustainability literacy and awareness throughout the university, and to strengthen strategic communication solutions. So our subcommittee has also been working in two working groups, as Peter mentioned earlier, the Student Alumni Working Group and the Staff and Faculty Working Group. I just want to say a big thank you to all the very engaged members of our team. We're also very excited to have more students join us this year, and we've been very productive over the summer. So I want to highlight a few things, and I know Julian will fall behind me, but some of the things that this committee has done over the last year has collaborated with university partners such as new student orientation, off-campus housing offices, human resources, and sustainability-focused student organizations to enhance and increase university communications with both student and employee audiences. We have also supported the implementation of the monthly Sustainability Leadership Update emails. If you're not receiving those emails, you can subscribe at the sustainability website at sustainability.jhu.edu. We've also worked with our partners in student orientation to develop new employee orientation with HR to develop new JHU slides and PowerPoints for all employees going through new employee orientation across the entire university. We've also collaborated with human resources to include sustainability resources and values on the HR benefits and jobs web pages for current and also prospective employees for the entire university. I'll turn it over to Julian.
Thanks, Jen. I think building off of your points, we've been doing a lot of work this year, really figuring out how to embed sustainability, norms and culture across the organization, and thinking about, what strengths already exist and what are some other opportunities to really bolster those through new resources and information. So it's been a pleasure to work with our committee, and really looking forward to the year ahead. We have some great momentum developing with the creation of an alumni networking platform through Hopkins Connect, and are broadening our engagement strategy with our various alumni, looking forward to partnering in those areas, and have some engagements coming up with Life Design Lab and others who are doing work in the student and alumni space. We, led by our one of the students, Celia Lane, who is here with us today. We're supporting next week's environmental justice panel with a broader environmental justice speaker series throughout the year. And I should say also that beyond the SLC, we also are doing some cross-institutional collaboration with peer universities hosted by Stanford, Dartmouth, and a few other schools, looking at how sustainability offices nationally are tackling collaborative issues around diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion. And so you'll see a variety of events throughout the course of this year that our subcommittee is supporting and leading in some spaces. Jessica Bast, who co-leads the Student Alumni Engagement Working Group of our subcommittee, has really been doing an enormous amount of work in developing additional student resources and guides with input from working group and subcommittee members. And Ann Haskins and Amy Murphy from Development and Alumni Relations and Human Resources, respectively, have been leading our staff and faculty engagement working group, and have been phenomenal at helping us do a robust mapping exercise looking at tactics and strategies for scaling sustainability at the organizational, leadership, and individual level. So we're eager and excited about the year ahead. And I'll pass it to the next group.
So thanks, Julian. Benzie, are you also there?
I am, but please, I was going to suggest you start for the first bullet points here.
Okay, great. Very happy to do that. So you've already heard from Provost Sunil about one of our initiatives, which is to create an academic focus in sustainable energy, and whether that would be an interdivisional department or something else, it will provide, we hope, a lot of opportunities for undergraduates and graduates to be educated both in technology and in policy. The subcommittee, let's see, sorry, can you flip back to research committee? Yeah, there we go. We've got 4 working groups. One is the academics, which Sunil told you about. Another one talked about DC programming, District of Columbia programming. A third is focusing on using the campus for education and research, our physical facility, dealing with our water runoff, our air pollution, our quality of life. And then finally, collaboration among disciplines. And again, there's this exciting energy initiative. So some highlights, Sunil told you about the energy department that's in the discussion stages now. And we're looking forward to involving the community and figuring out what it is we want to accomplish. And there are many paths up the mountain, right? So one of them may be the department, maybe something else. But we've presented this to the provost and to the president. We're talking with the deans. I think there's a lot of momentum and a lot of interest. We are proposing a policy presence for our the new building across from the National Gallery on Pennsylvania Avenue. And in my background here is one of those initiatives. With Columbia University, we've started a Future Power Markets Forum with sponsorship of 40 nonprofits and industrial groups that's looking at how do we create markets that will enable us to integrate renewable energy, renewable power, while keeping the lights on and keeping costs low. And if you've been following the news in California, that's definitely been a challenge. The committee, the Campus at Lab program, has been looking at ways they can organize themselves in activities and support those. So expect to hear more about that next year. And finally, we're going about very carefully trying to gain visibility for our sustainability research across the institution. There used to be an ESHI website doing that did that. It didn't do a terribly good job. We want to create, as part of the new website, something that really emphasizes how we are working together across departments and what opportunities there are for students to get involved. Next. Why don't you go ahead, Ben?
Great, thank you. And so just building on what Ben just said, a top priority for us in the coming year is to continue to flesh out this idea for an interdisciplinary energy department, which we view as a real opportunity and a critical, timely opportunity for the university to pursue. We're also, in terms of our academic research and policy programs for 555 Penn, as you are all aware, that building won't be open in the next year or two, but we really want to start these programs moving and start the outreach required. In our subcommittee work on this, we've discussed both the need from a policy engagement perspective to use this facility to bring decision makers and other stakeholders into the building for both symposia as well as engagement sessions that could perhaps contribute to education and our own research, but also to use it as a way to bring people information from the university. And that would involve both promoting, of course, our core research strengths, but also leveraging our position, our geographic position, and our status as the university to promote important policy directives that might not stem directly from one faculty member's expertise, but to become a place where that cultivates these ideas and gets them to policymakers. So in other words, positioning ourselves as a policy think tank, in addition to just promoting our own specific research strengths. And moving on to the other priorities, the Campuses Living Lab program, I'm really excited about. Jason Matias and a number of students have done great work looking at comparators with our peer institutions. And I think in the coming year, we're really going to be able to start moving forward on that, especially as the campus reopens. And finally, this idea has been indicated that we're going to map sustainability focused research. Lizzie and others have had great conversations with what's possible in this matter, and just really making our entire university aware of the rich sustainability research community they already live within, so that we can enhance those collaborations. And I'll end there.
So good morning. My name is Sally McConnell. I co-chair the operations subcommittee with Bob McLean, who Peter told you, who also co-chairs the overall committee with Peter. But Bob got called into a meeting this morning, and so I'm solo. But Bob is my counterpart at Homewood, and so I am the senior vice president of facilities for Johns Hopkins Medicine. So I sit at the East Baltimore campus, have responsibility for the 6 hospitals that make up Johns Hopkins Health System and for the facilities at School of Medicine. And I think it was very much Bob's idea that I would co-chair the operations subcommittee with him, so that we would make sure that we would have input from and an understanding in the very large 10.5 million square foot campus in East Baltimore as to the important endeavors of the overall committee, and then specifically of this operations subcommittee. So just to give you a bit of a sort of mission statement, which we wrote in the previous, or in the last year, our efforts are really to improve the daily operational and business practices of Johns Hopkins across all areas of its environmental footprint. And I just explained to you kind of the geography of all of that. So this would include energy, waste, food, water, transportation, wellness, procurement, and more. We have 39 members. As you can see, we have 4 working groups. Those working groups look at sustainable procurement, a green fleet of buses and other university vehicles, green laboratories, and again, both on our various campuses, so both at Homewood and primarily in East Baltimore, and then high performance and healthy buildings. Some of our operational highlights, we've worked with an external consultant on the JHU fleet electrification study, and I think we have some exciting ideas about what's going to happen there. Unfortunately, the marketplace is moving to allow us, I think, to have more options. Our Green Lab certification pilot with two institutes for nanobiotechnology in Croft Hall is ongoing. We're also starting a pilot in East Baltimore in one of our cancer research buildings. We've initiated a green building rating system assessment for JHU, and we have developed draft language for construction and demolition waste diversion. Next slide. Lizzie, I think there's a next slide. There we go. So some of our priorities for FY21, we're going to incorporate the electrification scope and send out an RFP so that as the university buys vehicles, we can make sure that they are in keeping with our specifications. We want to coordinate with the SLC research subcommittee to support a vision for the campus as a living lab initiative. We want to develop high performance and healthy building guidelines and specifications so that we can really make sure that as we move forward as an organization, we are conforming to those specs. We want to include sustainability as a new criteria for the JHU vendor guide. So that would include the many vendors that we use on the various campuses for all kinds of things that would impact that group of concerns for this committee. And then we want to work with our colleagues in the School of Medicine, which I am the primary bridge to promote energy efficient freezer purchases. And we're well on our way to looking at that. Thank you.
Thank you to co-chairs for your reports, and I will now pass the baton to Celia Lane, who will introduce the breakout groups.
Hi everybody, I'm Celia. I'm the undergraduate student representative on the steering committee. We're going to switch gears now and briefly transition to breakout rooms. So this will hopefully provide an opportunity to meet some of the other members of SLC across the different subcommittees. And we'll also ask that each of you start these breakout rooms by introducing yourselves to each other before diving into these questions that you can see on the screen. these questions are meant to really just provide a jumping off point for discussions so that we all can brainstorm what SLC should focus on for this year and what you all think action should look like for these different priorities. I know the breakout rooms kind of got a bit shuffled, but hopefully there'll be one representative from each breakout room who can speak about some of the different key points or themes that came up during your discussions and spend just about a minute going over those. So I can start with my breakout room. So we really focused in on the first two questions, looking at how climate change and sustainability as well as environmental justice can be better addressed by SLC. And we really talked more about how we can take more action on environmental justice. And there were some thoughts that perhaps the whole idea of what SLC is actually going to be doing on environmental justice or able to do on environmental justice is still a bit vague at this stage. So hopefully that those different roles can be better clarified. And then also looking at how we can train our students to become better sustainability advocates and become scientific advocates for climate science as well. And also looking for more clarity in terms of who's doing what work at Hopkins. So creating those dashboards and those resources that make it easier to figure out where the sustainability work is happening, where environmental justice work is happening, what's currently being done, and what can be done. And then one last thought was that it might be a good idea for SLC to take a look at potentially trying to connect funding opportunities for different environmental justice researchers, so people who are potentially interested in doing research on environmental justice issues, but have that barrier of not being able to secure funding. So looking at seed grants or other programs that would better make environmental justice research more accessible to different Hopkins researchers as well. So those were just some of the things that my group talked about. I kind of bounced all over the place, but now I'm going to popcorn to Jessica Bast. Do you want to share some of the things from your breakout room?
Sure. So we talked about a lot of different things. Quintina actually started talking about a vendor guide that procurement is working on, and we talked about how that's going to be a really great resource and kind of ties in with this sustainable living guide that we've been working on through the student and alumni working group. And it's going to be able to connect people with sustainable and local vendors, which is really great. We talked about how behavior change, kind of sustainable behavior change specifically, really revolves around convenience. And even if it's not intentional, this guide is going to help people purchase and think more sustainably. We also had a representative from the School of Medicine, and he discussed some of his concerns with recycling at the School of Medicine. And we discussed how the SLC is really a great resource for issues like this, because if you're able to bring up this issue, you're probably going to be able to connect with someone who can help you address this. Quintina mentioned that she can help through her office, and then I mentioned Leanna Hauser, who is also in the SLC and does a lot of waste-related things for the university now. So we talked about a few different things, but I don't want to take up too much more time. And I guess I'm going to be popcorning to Ben Hobbs. Sorry, Lizzie, I just saw your message.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Our group also talked about the issue that Celia mentioned about the role the SLC can play in environmental justice. And in particular, combine the first two, the sustainability plan and SLC. So I'm going to thank Rachel, who put in the chat box a link to the Baltimore Sustainability Plan, which, as she pointed out, is all over environmental justice on many different levels. So we were struggling a little bit trying to think of ways that Hopkins sustainability decisions impact issues of justice. And Rachel's suggestion is that this plan might have several ideas that we can also learn from, and so we should definitely take a look at that. There's also some discussion about the divestment issue, which has been something that the trustees considered over the last 3 years, the student group Refuel the Future, and where that stands now. And also there was discussion about what is the next step now that we've gotten this renewable electricity contract. What's the next step in terms of decarbonizing the campus? So we were all over the place, just like Jessica's group. Now I am supposed to popcorn to somebody else, but I don't see.
Tis I, David Yaffe.
Go for it.
All right, and I'm substituting for Susanna, who unfortunately still has audio problems. We also covered a lot of ground, but I think I could maybe categorize them in 3 areas, sort of from the most recent to the back to the first. The most recent being the earliest. Stuart Chaikin, who was at the lecture in energy policy, whatever, at Bloomberg, and certainly I support the idea of an interdisciplinary energy program and think that SLC should support that. That one's easy. Rob and Ian McGowan, and Rob, I'm sorry, I now blanked on your last name, talked a bit about the lessons of COVID to inform our thinking. And Rob is an architect who works in facilities. Ian works on the dining hall issues. COVID had, in the experience of Hopkins in planning for reopening before the pivot happened, realized that that capacity of classrooms was going to be dramatically reduced because of the distancing requirements. And that certainly pitches up issues about that, of the interaction between sort of knowledge and teaching and what the university does. If those conditions were to continue, and classroom capacity was reduced to 25%, as was the case, how much do you build out in order to expand capacity versus perhaps thinking about delivery of teaching modalities, and there's I think an issue for somebody to sink their teeth into, and Ian pointed out that in the planning for supplies, like recycled paper bags, there are the sources of supply for recycling materials from offices and other sources in the economy have diminished, and shortages picked up. So again, while we can talk about setting goals for sustainability in a COVID environment, you need to bring some of that, some of those shortages and realities into account and figure out how to adjust and still maintain your principles. And then finally, as Ben noted, the first 2 questions sort of merged, bled into each other, and particularly Janae and Honor, who is a student, led the discussion a lot, as well as Stuart. There is a and the discussion was, should the SLC take more of an open advocacy role, or should the SLC push the university to take more of an open advocacy role on positions, to take positions on issues involving environmental justice, sustainability, climate change, and so on and so forth. And the issue of divestment did come up. And full disclosure, I was on the board of trustees at the time, and it somewhat involved, somewhat not in the decision making, but somewhat involved in the discussion. And the issue of divestment is, you know, is multifaceted, shall we say? But I think the discussion then and the discussion now would be somewhat different, because things have moved, because the situation has moved in the economy as well as perhaps in the university. So that was sort of a high-level summary of a wide-ranging discussion. And
I think Julian's going.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. So our group had a great discussion focusing largely at the intersection of collaborative regional engagement with Baltimore City and issues of equity and environmental justice. There's a pretty clear consensus that, you know, sustainability as a framework aligning with the academic mission is really critical, and that these issues are, you know, how we sort of bolster, you know, our work, not just you know, as an isolated campus, but regionally, and tying that back to our teaching and research, while at the same time doing it in a respectful, inclusive way that doesn't use the city as a laboratory. But how do we create thoughtful partnerships with our partners that can improve the livelihood of Baltimoreans, while also giving, you know, our students opportunities for participation in those spaces. There's discussion about the progressiveness of some of the incoming local administration and the opportunities that presents. A new mayor incoming, and a lot of momentum for more progressive, sustainable policies. I know Ben Zaitchik, who sits on the city's Sustainability Commission, discussed a little bit about just his optimism for the work that is happening in that space. And although I had to step away to help my daughter with a virtual pre-K emergency for a minute, I see some of you are linking Baltimore's sustainability plan, which was published in 29 and really rooted in community-based equity solutions. And so there's obviously a lot of opportunities here. Megan, sorry, is Frost Davis? Do I have that right? I'm blanking on which of the names.
You're good.
Okay, cool. Megan was talking about the need for integrated solutions with School of Medicine, looking at environmental justice, COVID, infrastructure, and energy solutions. And Tamo brought up opportunities for looking at local carbon offsets that can address our emissions footprint while also helping address issues of equity in the area. So a wide-ranging conversation. And to wrap up, Roger Becks talked about the need to really scale sustainability as a university value and how we bring more people broadly into this conversation so that you know, the good things we're talking about can be scaled and really elevated, I think, to make sustainability more visible and inclusive of the broader Johns Hopkins community. And after me, I think it's Leah's turn.
Thanks, Julian. So our group also had a fairly wide-ranging discussion. Some of the things that we focused on were on this first question of developing inputs into the sustainability plan, of how we could actually inform this process. We were thinking about using sort of an EPA model of public commentary, but putting that at the scale of the working groups and the subcommittees in order to have you know, people who are really engaged with a particular subject be able to give their priorities and informed opinions on how well the plan accomplishes that, and maybe having that be both a reactive process, but maybe also pre-drafting priorities in the development of the sustainability plan. The other thing that we spent a fair amount of time talking about was this idea that Provost Kumar brought up about Hopkins being a purveyor of truth, and as a SLC taking on that role when it comes to sustainability, and having that be both a role for within the community, increasing our communications in terms of really making sure that there are resources and communication about what priorities are. We talked about recycling as an example, in terms of it, it's feasible, but the level of impact is kind of less clear. And that's one example where I think the Sustainability Leadership Council could be some source of information and be sort of a center for people to be informed on issues, that range from things like recycling, but also to larger scale sustainability relevant concepts. And so being both that role for within our community, but also to the world at large. And that's something that when you think about the COVID-19 process and what we've learned from that, Hopkins very early on took this big leadership role in terms of the mapping and the counting of cases, and that kind of, being looked to and taking that role for the world is something that maybe we could think about that model and how we could do something similar when it comes to sustainability goals. Curious if anyone else in the group has other things that they wanted to highlight from what we talked about. Otherwise, I will popcorn it off to Hannah.
I think I'm supposed to pick it up. My name's not Hannah, it's Kylie, but thank you, Leah. No sweat. Is that right, Lizzie? Okay. Hello, everyone. I had an awesome group, and I want to say thanks to Anne, who was our moderator. So in our group, I would say that our conversation kind of vacillated between really large questions and some smaller questions in terms of concrete and discrete things we might look at. On the at the higher level, we talked about the need for there to be a commitment around environmental justice and the president's upcoming 2020 or 2030 plan. And at the same time, there was very much a feeling that while we want to set a vision, we need to also make sure that there are discrete goals, discrete SMART goals, if you will, that we can pursue. And that's something that Kellogg lifted up. More importantly, we talked a lot about why it's important to partner with other organizations or form alliances with other organizations and community. And there was a desire to see what more we could be doing with SOURCE, as well as the Center for Social Concern. And then this kind of brought up a challenge that we've all heard before, which is an issue around siloing. And we talked about how the siloing might inadvertently be hurting us in our bid for environmental justice, both in Baltimore as well as internally. And thinking about if we could do more work around co-teaching and sharing opportunities, especially around teaching courses around environmental justice and environmental racism. One idea that I thought was really compelling was this idea around, and this was something that I believe Rebecca brought up, is if we could see if we could pursue a Bloomberg Distinguished Professor who could focus on environmental justice or environmental racism, as well as if we could ensure that there are more courses and their courses are consistently provided around environmental justice and racism with focusing on Baltimore. And then in terms of the, around these kind of larger siloing questions, it was really figuring out how can we do more co-teaching, how can we make that more viable given kind of the constraints that professors and students have to work within in terms of the funding mechanisms at the university. And then there was a general comment around our dissemination of information, and that at this point, there are many faculty and students who are working on questions around environmental justice, around sustainability, but their recommendations are often kind of produced internally or they're shared internally, but they're not getting out to the larger community. So that was a conversation trying to figure out how we can ensure that more people are hearing the point of view from our leadership and from our academic leadership as well. I hope I've captured everything. Group, if I've missed anything, feel free to, I guess, drop it in the chat. And thank you.
And we're going to go to Jason next.
I'll summarize that our group had a curiosity on how we measure both emissions and our overall environmental impact for Johns Hopkins. There's a strong interest for the next sustainability plan to have a broader scope of overall environmental impact for water use, air travel, and especially procurement of goods, to use Johns Hopkins' overall purchasing power to kind of change the marketplace in ways and have that equity benefit as well as environmental benefit. And I'm going to popcorn to Leanna.
Okay, two things. This popcorn thing is new to me, so I love it. I might be making some popcorn tonight because I'm now very hungry. And secondly, there's always that worry when you're last in the breakout. You're like, no, everyone's going to take the things we thought of. I am really happy to say that thank you, Christine Duke, for really focusing us on the urgency piece. And I didn't hear as much of that. So I'm happy to share what we talked about in that, you know, as we talk about this plan, admittedly, it is, you know, something that's long-term, and that is a great thing. 2020, you know, ideally it's something that we're working towards. However, there is urgency. And so Christine shared a lot about what they have been doing in their, in the Green Labs group, and knowing that there are some very quick and easy and relatively inexpensive things that we can do right now. And so, you know, speaking of, you know, sensors on the, you know, the lab equipment, freezer adjustments. And I really loved how it took together, it combined the operational aspects, like some technological fixes that really have an impact on behavior change. So there's an immediate energy savings, but the long-term impact on the people that are interacting with that technology and better understanding the awareness of their impact in terms of energy. So there was a really great discussion on, like, yes, we have this long-term plan, but let's really, as a group and through the work that we've already done over this past year, take some of those lessons and apply them immediately. Because I think our university needs to see action in addition to long-term planning. And then quickly, I'll just say, I don't want to miss what everybody else said, but I know we don't have a lot of time. I'll just jump to harnessing the energy of our staff and students and faculty that we're seeing across the university, given these multiple pandemics of climate change, COVID, and environmental and racial justice. So that we can really keep the momentum going and making sure that we're equitable across all of our campuses. Thank you for a great team.